Okay, so we can start. So I would like to introduce Jessica Hernandez. Jessica Hernandez is the Director for College Success Programs and Community Engagement, a newly created Central Access, Success, and Academics. In this role, Jessica helps coordinate K-12 campus community partnerships and oversees several college access and retention projects, including the TRIO Educational Talent Search and Student Support Service Programs, EOP, Care Scholars, and CCSU's dual and she has worked in post-secondary education for over 20 years at public and private institutions in Washington, D.C., Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and in Connecticut, where she has helped develop campus community collaborations focused on a variety of issues, including homelessness and food insecurity, health disparities, juvenile justice, and K-12 educational achievement. Jessica serves on several local boards, including the Community Foundation of Greater New Britain, United Way, Central and Northeastern Connecticut, OIC, and Roots. She earned her bachelor's and master's in social work from the University of Connecticut and is currently enrolled in a higher education leadership program at Central Connecticut State University.
Yeah.
So we usually start with just asking about like your story growing up. Share that.
So I grew up in Norwalk, Connecticut, which I guess is about as the southern part of Connecticut is. And my family, so I was the only person in my family born in the United States. My family were from Honduras, and so growing up, there was a lot of kind of navigating. I was the only English speaker, so I was responsible for kind of helping translate and figure out a lot, things that were happening at home. My mom, her kind of message, I think, growing up was to figure out what I was going to do, that she hoped that I would pursue college, but she didn't really have a lot that she could do to help me get there. So I was very fortunate to participate in some programs as a high school student. So I was a TRIO Upward Bound participant. I was in high school, which helped me figure out how to get myself to college and really helped me kind of figure out all the ins and outs that you need to, at least to get yourself there. And then in college, I participated in a TRIO SSS program that also helped me, figure out a lot about what I wanted to do, how to explore the things that I was interested in. I probably changed my major about 3 or 4 times. Just again, I knew that I liked certain things. I'd always been a strong advocate, speaking on behalf of people who didn't have a voice. And so I wanted to figure out different ways to continue to do that. So I had a job as an undergrad in the admissions. And the admissions director that I worked for had created a program to bring students of color to UConn so that they could see themselves there. We would do tours, we would kind of talk to them about, college and what it took to get to college. And so this was a program called Project Recruit. And I think it was the first time that I was like, oh, kind of like doing this work. But when you go to college, there really isn't a major to work in higher ed. So I just kind of knew that I really enjoyed engaging with students, talking to them about college. I knew how helpful that was. So kind of helped put me on the path of the other things.
Would you say that one of your biggest challenges, like going to college or just education in general, was the language? That big difficulty?
I didn't see it as a difficulty. Actually, in a weird way, it was an asset for me because while it did kind of make me, have more adult responsibility, it also helped me find my voice. And so it made me a lot more confident to be able to talk to people, be able to, really ask questions. And the fact that I could communicate with an entire different population of people, being bilingual as a strength. It was hard sometimes. And to this day, when I try to explain to my mom what I do, she's like, get it, but okay. So telling her that I was majoring in political science, right? She didn't have a large high level of education, so explaining some of the things that I was doing or some of the experiences that I was having. Um, my family didn't quite understand, but otherwise I saw it as straight.
I was talking to my mom this morning about that because I was stressed about everything. So I called her and I was asking her opinion on things like that. And like her whole idea of college as an immigrant mom is like, be a doctor or be a lawyer. And I'm like, oh, but I'm interested in this and that. She's like, I don't understand. Can you explain it? And I'm explaining to her. She's like, you came all the way from Brazil to do this. And I'm like, come on. Kind of like, I know she wants the best for me because all of the things that she went through. But it's like it says a little hard to explain to every time I try to explain, we just don't get it.
Yeah.
We're talking about the translation thing. Like I remember when I had to translate for my mom, and like I would see all my friends like they will have parties, they will like stay after school, and I would have to go home to do like help my mom with paperwork, translate it to lawyers, translate it to like when she wanted to rent a house. Like it was like so many responsibilities, and I was only like 14, 13, so it was like kind of like overwhelming and all that. But like you say, it's also a good thing because every time I talk to people, they're like, "Oh, you don't talk like someone that is like now I'm 21, but before they're like, you only 17." So it's kind of I don't know. Is it in good? Is in a weird way? Is a good thing to just saying.
It is, and it can be overwhelming, and it gives you a different perspective on the world, I think, a little bit. You get to see a lot of the things that maybe don't work as well in the system. I remember being fairly young, and my mom's friend had been assaulted, and I had to go with her and my mom to the police station to translate and explain what had happened. And the police were much more interested in finding out about her immigration status and about other things. So I think, you do grow up a little bit faster and you realize how systems don't always work the way they're supposed to. But I agree. I think it can, I was fortunate in that I did have older siblings who, even though they didn't speak the language, they were, when they started coming to the United States, were able to pick up a lot and kind of took off some of the burden that I eventually had. So in that respect, I wasn't the only person afterwards. But again, I'm glad that you're seeing it's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's feeling like I used to like think that, oh my God, I want to just be a kid like everybody else. But now that I'm older, I'm like, okay, I see now. And like, it's funny because people from the Brazilian community, they reach out to me to help them because my mom's friends know about me. And like, I'm always like translating something or going to school to talk to teachers for them or going to the consulate, like the consulate that they have to like talk to them. So I'm like, I don't know. I feel good about it now. Before I used to be like, it's too much.
Yeah, so again, as Jefferson, as you mentioned, it's a new area. Kind of decided to put together some of the resources. Most colleges and universities have developed initiatives to make sure that students are successful, that they feel supported, that they get help navigating, especially for first generation college students. And so we've had EOP, which is has been here for over 50 years, a very strong embedded program that had a person, that it was a big loss for the institution when Ms. Rasko retired. But then we had these other programs that we had recently gotten grants for to serve similar populations, first generation college students, students who, have demonstrated potential and just really need some assistance navigating through the layers that a university has. So we kind of put together those resources into one area that would provide more holistic support for students. So I work with wonderful colleagues that are providing a lot of direct service to students, advising, helping tutoring, helping connect to other resources here on campus. And so I work with them to oversee those initiatives. We have a lot of grant requirements that we have to maintain. So kind of tracking some of the data that we need to submit so that we can keep our funding. But really, I get to just kind of support a lot of the great people that work in these programs. And so have you all heard of our TRIO programs, our Student Support Services program?
So they came to one of my history classes my sophomore year. That's where I first learned about TRIO.
Okay.
And it wasn't until like last couple of weeks that I actually went and sat down with them because of some other students. Under Jacob and Raymond, they took me,
Yeah.
and that's when I heard it. And I think my sister was part of summer program that you guys had.
Yeah.
With the, like the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was really neat that you guys did.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these are, again, so our TRIO programs were established in the 60s as part of the Johnson administration's war on poverty. And so acknowledging that accessing higher education is a way for people to lift themselves out of poverty. And so really pushing initiatives to help first generation low income students access higher ed. And so, you know, the program provides a lot of advising support. It's just we're an extra kind of home away from home, a place to check in, you know, with someone to kind of run some things by, you know, I'm kind of thinking that I might want to pursue this, but you know, we provide some assistance for students who are thinking about graduate school. You know, we'll do some graduate school visits pretty soon, helping pay for applications because that does get pretty expensive, right? But really, it's just, you know, someone here that's kind of believing in you and pushing you along, much like I'm sure you get here at the center. And you just can never have enough people to lift you up when you're just feeling like I can't do this and I need to quit. So yeah, and then EOP, obviously, you know, the campus is pretty familiar with EOP, but very similar in that sense. One of the kind of the Care Scholars initiative is one that provides very similar support academically, but also is looking at how we create a better campus culture that acknowledges the unique experience of students who, the experiences for those individuals who have either been involved with foster care and adoption. And then dual enrollment is something I'm really excited about. We're really helping reach out to high school students and helping them take classes here at Central before they get here, so that they can, you know, get over the fear of how difficult a class might be. You know, and hopefully they can decide that Central is where they want to make home for the next 4 years.
I have a lot of friends from high school, like most of them like minority students that were like English learning and all that. Also like most of them would come from Harper and all that. And it was really sad because none of them ended up going to college, none of them ended up, like not none of them, but like most of them didn't even finish high school. Because there's this thing, like even here when I talk to minority students and people of color now that they always have this feeling like they don't, not that they don't belong, but it's like so overwhelming going to class and have to deal with things outside of college. And when I talk like to people, especially here too, they are always like, oh, have you ever walked in a room and you just like, you feel like, oh, this is not a place for me? And it's funny because this semester I was dealing with that. It was kind of like so hard for me. I'll come here like, oh my God, I feel like I can't do this anymore. And now I'm like, I'm getting hang of it, but I heard that from a lot of students too, which was kind of like surprising, especially the minority students. They're like, I don't know if college is for me. And I don't know, like you're saying all that.
Yeah, you know, so I always try to be careful because we in our heads have this like assumption, right, that all individuals of color come from low income backgrounds, and you know, and I was very fortunate. One of the people that have most influenced me. My best friend I met in the fourth grade, African-American female. She was third generation. Like her parents had gone to college, her parents' parents had gone to college. Pretty affluent, right? So I try to be very mindful of the fact that it isn't monolithic, right? That there are very different experiences, but oftentimes it's the socioeconomic background that kind of gives similar experiences. We've worked with a lot of, and this is very regional, right? If we were in certain rural areas, we'd see a lot more white students who feel the same way. And so oftentimes it's not feeling like you belong due to kind of lack of exposure to middle class experiences when you may come from more limited economic resources. And so, I think that income has a lot to do with it. Experiences have a lot to do with it. The ability to travel and maybe be in certain spaces that aren't new to you, help you feel more comfortable. That being said, I, am a very seasoned adult. I just had a birthday, so I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm getting a lot older. When I first started working in higher ed, I would lie and say I was younger or older than I was because I was pretty close in age to college students. And then I caught up to the age that I said I was when I would lie. And then, I got much older than that. But
So, Jessica, which day?
Saturday.
Ah, all right, I was Sunday.
Yeah. Oh, happy belated.
Thank you. Same to you.
But, but I still, even being in these circles for over 20 years, it's a natural instinct. I walk in a room and I'm like, okay, right? There's a sense of like comfort and belonging when you see people that kind of physically you feel like you may have some things in common with. But one of the things that I love about higher ed, and I would like to see that change, right? Where I can kind of be in different spaces and not have to like, you put on kind of like okay, now this is my work, Jessica, right? And then when you're around kind of people that you feel like you have shared experiences or culture or background, you kind of get to be a little bit, freer without having to think so much. But what I've learned also is that I have made a lot of assumptions about whether or not I had things in common with certain people because they were in those spaces and maybe they didn't look like me. So that I've enjoyed, and I like that about higher ed. That again, it's this great equalizer. At least it was thought of as this great equalizer, where regardless of your background or your socioeconomic, experiences, you get to kind of engage on the same playing field. Whether or not that's true, depends, I think. But I have enjoyed, and some of the people that have been my greatest advocates and mentors have not been, Latinos. But I have had many women of color be very, very strong advocates for me. And so I think I enjoy that space in higher ed. I struggle sometimes, and I think maybe I should, try something new. But would I be in a space where I can have these deep conversations about social issues or, where I can meet people from so very diverse backgrounds? I don't know. So I think higher ed, checks off a lot of the things on my list.
When you were like a college student, did you like went to those kind of things, like feeling of like,
Oh, yeah.
belonging,
Oh, yeah.
One thing that they told me that I thought was very interesting is like, as a person of color, I assume you always have to go an extra mile. You always have to prove your worth, like that mentality. I think also like immigrants family are always like, gotta prove that you deserve to be here. We came here for a reason. So like, I don't. It's not funny, but it's just like interesting how that kind of like different people share the same kind of like mindset and like same experience, even though they are not from the same background.
Yeah, I definitely empathize with what you're saying, and I know that it is a very real thing that many people, and I think at times probably in professional settings, I still worry, whether or not, because I didn't have the same language exposure, my exposure to vocabulary, all of those things, reading the same books that maybe some colleagues read, or that maybe I'm not as good, or I don't appear to be, as eloquent or well spoken or all of those things. But I also, and I think working with students helps me check myself sometimes, because I don't want our students to feel like they have to prove themselves so that other people can feel like they belong. I want our students to kind of prove themselves so that they can realize the potential that they have within themselves, right? So it's not about so that other people can accept them. It's about them realizing the great strength and potential that they have. And sometimes when you haven't really been, there's a narrative about, again, when you look at who's in higher ed, and who isn't in higher ed, there can be a narrative that certain people don't belong, or that they're not there because they haven't worked hard enough. You talked about, some of the people you went to school with in Hartford. What we oftentimes don't want to talk about is because there are systemic reasons that have prevented many people from, gaining access. That if you weren't one of the lucky ones who had, a program that helped you, or if maybe your home environment, because of economic reasons, didn't provide a platform for you, because you didn't have anyone around you that followed the same path. That's why you're not there, not because you don't have the potential. And in higher ed settings, we struggle still with that to a certain extent, and we kind of reinforce this narrative that we're somehow deficient. And I don't think it's intentional, hopefully not intentional all the time. And so kind of reframing why programs like the ones that, I'm involved with exists. It's because we understand that we live in a country with so many opportunities, but financially, those opportunities can be limited for people. That we know what happens, when you may be surrounded, by a lack of opportunity. When the value of your education, or the education that you receive, is determined by the wealth around you, right? Like all of those things can impact how people see themselves and what they're introduced to that excite them about education. In a lot of communities, for many reasons, right? Like education isn't exciting anymore. We contribute to that sometimes, right? Like all many classes, I remember at least you guys have devices now. We went to college and it was like your professor lectured for an hour and a half, and you just had to figure out how to take the right notes. All of the technology that exists now wasn't as available. And so if you didn't understand how to do that or know how to do that, you kind of fell behind a little bit. So, and I remember, so when I went to UConn, it was a very low enrollment of students of color. And I think maybe the first year I was there was an article that was published where students basically said that the SSS program that I was a part of was bringing down the level of education for other students, because we had somehow been admitted into the university and didn't bring a lot to the table. So, I think I would love to say that that has changed drastically, but I think a lot of people may have some ideas that because we're expanding access, that means that somehow students aren't as prepared. And some of our students are prepared and talented in just ways that maybe aren't acknowledged in higher ed settings, right? Maybe some of our students, myself included, didn't know all of the grammatical kind of rules to follow when writing a paper, but we had these wonderful ideas and perspectives about the world that contributed to the classroom discussion. And so I struggle with how do we find a balance? And, I would be lying if I said, oh, we do everything so great. No, because there is that balance of helping our students kind of navigate and acquire some of the skills for operating in middle and upper class society, in terms of how you speak and how you write and how you communicate, while still acknowledging the fact that the strengths that they bring already are good enough, right? And so how do we find spaces so that students feel competent in navigating both? Now, just, I want to preface this by saying that it's also a very generational way of thinking, right? Like the generation that I grew up in and how we see things is very different than, how you all see things and how you kind of navigate what it means to be in a higher ed setting, or, what society should or should not be doing. So, not everyone may agree with my point, or some of the way we think about things. But, again, hopefully things continue to evolve, and eventually, I mean, the goal is to just increase for students from different backgrounds to be able to see themselves comfortable enough in the space.
So you mentioned how socioeconomic status and exposure to higher education can hinder students from feeling like they belong in college, or even attempting to go down that path. Are there certain barriers to success that you've seen for central students specifically, or barriers to education, or in general too?
Yeah, I mean, look, in general, it just kind of from my experience, I think some of the barriers kind of include the connections that students are making with what they're learning in the classroom, and then how it gets applied in group settings. Especially if you're not quite sure what things interest you, or you haven't kind of hit something that's just like, wow, that's something that I really, really enjoy. You're still kind of going through the motions, and then it becomes very just, routine. Like, okay, I have to go to this class because it's a requirement. I have to do this because it's a requirement. And we're all different in how we learn and how we process. And, I like learning. I really am really interested in learning new things in specific areas. When it comes to math, I'm not so interested in learning. I'm just like, no, just what do I need to do to pass, right? And so the things that get me excited are very different than the things that get other people excited. So I think that that's one, right? It's just thinking of I'm spending all this money, or the burden of having to work and balance all of these different things. I've worked at other institutions where, students have a higher percentage of being residential, and they're not going to school full time, and navigating 30 hours a week of work at the same time. I was very privileged in that sense, that I went to a school at a time where the investment in higher ed was there. I wasn't paying, absorbent amount of money to go to school. My Pell Grants covered a lot of, so I didn't have to work to survive. I was very fortunate, regardless, despite the fact that I came from a very low income family. I went to school that really provided a lot of financial kind of support for me. So that's another really big barrier. When you think about why you're paying all of this money to go to school, a lot of it is to network, to expose yourself to new things, to join clubs, to develop your leadership skills, to kind of learn how to navigate in certain circles. And when you just come to class and then you leave because you have to go to work and you have to, do all these other things at home, it doesn't always leave time for you to take advantage of all of the things that higher ed brings and that you gain from higher ed. So I think that's really another barrier too. I'd kind of developed myself as a leader because I had to, but then I had the luxury to join clubs and to volunteer and to work, this job at admissions that I really loved, that I felt I was making a difference. I didn't have to rush and leave and go to a job. That if I didn't get there, I would get fired, and then I couldn't pay my tuition, or I couldn't pay my car note, or I couldn't. So I think that's a big thing, but a lot of it is connection. And so, finding like your purpose, finding why you're there. And for some, it's okay, you know, I'm here because I need a job and that's enough. I think for some people, that's not enough. And they want to do something that's meaningful. And you kind of get to a point where you're like, what am I doing this for? I could get a job and be okay. Um, and then I do think that we have to kind of work on making environments a little bit more diverse and welcoming for people. And that's something that, we have to continue to work at. And then the final thing, I'll be honest, and I can't believe I'm saying this because sometimes, but I think one big barrier is, and so even though I may not have always turned in all of my work, at least my professor knew who I was. And when I got close enough where I was like, ooh, I've missed a little bit too much work, I could at least go and talk to my professors and say, look, can I make up some work? What have, because at least they saw me in class every day. Or if I didn't go to class, I think, sometimes students forget that faculty members are human beings and sometimes they're willing to kind of work with you, sometimes they're not, but that doesn't make them good or bad, right? It's just, we all have to adapt to kind of, you have a job. Sometimes you'll have a good boss, sometimes you won't, but that doesn't stop you from doing the work. But we tend to like think that the moment that we're in right now is going to be forever instead of just thinking, okay, the moment that I'm in right now is just right now. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but I can always turn that around next semester. Yeah. It's a good questions.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So as you were talking, remember that I told you about like now that I have to make a decision if I want to follow my passion or if I just want to go for the money. Like I don't know, it's something weird to say, but the more that you learn, let's say, like now that I'm in sociology class, I talk to my friends all the time about it. Like the more that you learn about the system, the more hopeless you become. I was gonna ask you, like, how do you still like, how you keep yourself motivated to follow like the path that you decide to?
Sometimes I'm like, that's it, I'm done. So I'll be honest. It's not always, flowers and, sunny days, but I think little wins kind of mean a lot. And, in this line of work, little wins translate into students who go on and work through challenges and barriers and become successful in whatever that means for them. And so that like translates into generations down the road. And so those little wins, there's so many times where, I'm like, I want to connect with students so bad and I don't, right? And that kind of like, I need you to want, and I'm not everybody's cup of tea, right? And so sometimes that is like, well, what am I doing? Well, okay, but for every, student that maybe I'm not as successful, or for every program or initiative that we do that isn't successful, there are things that are successful. And so that, have an impact. And so I think that that's the best thing that I can say. I also know the impact of what happens when students who are first in their families and graduate go on and then help other people in their communities. And it just kind of replicates that way. But at the end of the day, when I worked at one point, I worked with high school students. I became an upward bound counselor. And, I would tell my students, like, you may not end up being rich. I mean, you may not, you may just end up being okay, but you will have this freedom to choose what you do every day, right? Like you can decide whether you want to use your brain and solve problems as a means of making money, or whether you want to make money in other ways. And that freedom and that flexibility, I think, to choose the things that you do for money is the biggest gift that I think a higher ed degree can give you. More so than the money. I think and a lot of people will say, right, you follow your passion, the money will come. And I've met many people who have parlayed a passion into a very successful career. It also takes a lot of hard work and dedication. And I think that sometimes we're just not really willing to be very like self-reflective and honest with ourselves, that maybe I'm just not willing to put in that level of work to get there. Because there's a lot of sacrifice that may come with certain things. And that's okay too, right? As long as for me, with my, the high school students I used to work with, I think for all of the wonderful, staff that we all work together to work with students, I think it's just, are you happy with what you're doing, right? Are you happy with your path? And will you be happy with what you're doing? There's so many students come back to grad school because they followed someone else's path. And they realize that's not what they want. And then they're like, nope, I'm going to come and get a completely different degree because now I know what it is that I want. But guess what? They had the option to do that because they had that degree to start off with. So, and recently I've started kind of being more okay with the fact that college doesn't necessarily have to be the path for everyone. It's a very difficult environment that you guys and other younger generations are dealing with, and that the cost of attending college does not necessarily always balance out financially. It used to be with us, we went to college and we knew we were getting a job, and we knew for the most part we were going to be okay. So I get it why people have to be thoughtful on it, but sometimes it's also the choices and the advising that they're getting. Because I would work with students who wanted to do public interest work, but wanted to pay $100,000 a year to do public interest work. I'm like, you're probably not going to make a lot of money. You'll be rewarded in so many other ways. Is that the best option for you? But again, not everyone has to kind of walk them through that decision making.
I just want to front and say, I agree with you. I don't think so. I've met a lot of people who kind of set themselves, I went to school with a lot of them, made this, like, if I go here, I will make a lot of money. And if I do that, I won't. And they wind up at 35 or 40 hating their jobs. Absolutely hating their jobs. And they quit. And they go and try at age 40 when they have kids and a house and obligations, they try to go back to school to do what they think they probably should have done right in the first place. And I've also met a lot of students, Bailey, and this is kind of why I've been sort of, when I see you, encouraging you to go in the passionate direction. I've seen a huge number of people turn, over the course of a career, turn what they love to do into something at which they are tremendously successful, and they do actually make good money. They may not be Jeff Bezos, but they actually do very, very well. And they're happier. They're happier because they don't feel like they're going to work. Yeah. And I think in some ways, the question, I don't know, Jessica, see what you think. I think the question in some ways, somebody point to me, what would you like to be doing in 5 years and in 10 years? I never was able to answer that question. I'm still not really, right? I'd like not to be dead. How's that? Right? But like, my nephews and I once had this conversation, like, how much money do you feel like you need to earn? Yeah, like right away. Or, what do you want to do? What's your idea of a good life? Yeah. So if your family's in Brazil, like the ability to fly back and forth to Brazil on a regular basis to, right, maintain yourself here and maintain yourself there. I mean, I don't know. Those questions are kind of individual, yeah. But one of the things about being an English teacher, which I currently think is my current theory about what Isabelle should do with her life, because you have to see her discussing with Amy Przorsky and Kathy Ritzenhoff books that they read in her class. It's just like, you know, you don't see that level of engagement that frequently. Yeah. And I don't know if Adi has told you, but she's becoming a jewelry designer. Yeah. And Jefferson is like, you know, he wants to be a social studies teacher. Yeah, that's what he wants. And I tried to convince one of our other student workers that maybe grad school would be an idea, because one of our speakers kind of invited him to talk to her about graduate school. Yeah, he's like, no, I want to be a high school teacher. That's what I've always wanted to be. I do not want to get, you know, I'm like, okay, fine. I just, you know, whatever. But we have a very successful history grad who tried to be an accounting major, and he kept failing because he thought he needed a job that was going to pay him a lot of money, and he kept failing the classes, and he finally wound up coming back to coming to the history department, and he signed up to be a history social studies education major. It didn't go well either because he really didn't want to be a teacher, but he kind of thought that those were the only options. Well, he now, among other things, he's finishing a PhD at the University of Delaware. He has his own business in public history consulting, and he works for Preservation Connecticut as one of the experts in the state of Connecticut about helping urban communities renovate historic buildings in downtown urban, well, in urban centers. And he loves it. And he's making money. You know, I mean, he's not Jeff Bezos, but he's also not living on the street, right? So I don't know. I think, and when you talk to him, it just shines all over him, like how happy he is with what he's doing. You know, sometimes it takes a little bit longer to figure that out but yeah, I'm a big advocate of not doing what you hate, says the recovering high school Spanish teacher. Yeah. I'm still recovering. No, my parents were like, oh, you're going to be a Spanish major. Well, then you'll be a high school teacher. I was like, I don't want to do that. Right. And I didn't even know that this job that I have now existed. I mean, I knew there were colleges, obviously, and professors, but like, you know, that I could be one never crossed my mind. But anyway, so that's just my 2 cents. Yeah. So I'm wondering, I cannot remember. So you were at Georgetown, right? Working at Georgetown before you came here, and I just wonder, you know, were there programs at Georgetown that you would think we could hang on. That we could introduce here more, or you know, I know they did yeah, I mean, I know I don't remember what her last name is, but Kathy wasn't Weigert, because I don't think she took her husband's name. But she was she ran the community engagement programs at Notre Dame before she went to Georgetown. Kathy, what's her last name? Do I remember?
I don't recall, but to your question, so actually I was there a couple of universities ago, and that is the area that I was in. It was actually an alternative to incarceration program for young people.
Oh, wow,
And-
okay.
And so the program, so we matched Georgetown students up as tutors and mentors with the students in the program. And so we kind of did some cultural activities, we went on trips, and so the goal was to kind of reduce the recidivism rate for the young people in the program. And so, one of the things that I was really impressed by, and part of it was a Jesuit mission, but really the strong connection between academics and applied learning. And so, I spent some time here doing, or trying to kind of help push along some community engagement work and really allowing students. And I was always so amazed that, what do you think was the largest major of the students who volunteered in the program? What would you guess?
Political science,
Psychology?
social work.
And guess.
What would you guess? I mean, any guess, Jefferson? It was
Spanish.
business.
Oh.
The majority of my students were business majors.
Wow.
And I would ask them because it wasn't what right? I was the same, like I would guess. And they, some of them, it was because they'd come from communities where they had experienced that, and it was very important for them to give back despite the fact that they were on a business track. And some of them just thought, if I could figure out how to communicate and engage and convince, young people who have to make these really tough life choices, to kind of make different choices, then maybe I'll be very effective in a business setting. So, I think that was my real kind of first introduction to thinking about the impact that higher ed institutions can have in the communities that they're housed, but also how much communities impact students at these institutions. And so, we have a wonderful new center here that really encourages community engagement. And for me, the great thing about all of that work that they're doing that you can all get involved in is trying out things that you may not think are going to get you one step closer to figuring something out about what you want to do. And, Marianne mentioned something about kind of not knowing the next 5 years. I don't think anything that I ever did was intentional, and that I had the path of like, I'm going to do this for this long. And then there are some people, I don't operate that way, but some people do and are very successful that way. I just kind of let the work follow me, right? So everything that I tried, all the mistakes and failures that I made, taught me things about myself, and then it set me up for the next opportunity and the next adventure. And I think seeing your career path as an adventure, as an opportunity for you to kind of learn things about yourself, to hopefully do some good, in whatever it is that you're doing, and develop more skills, and just, I think opportunities just kind of follow. But, you have to be disciplined, you have to kind of, make some sacrifices, you have to, but when you're doing something that interests you, you're just kind of following a path that presents itself. I don't know that that's, something that works for everyone, because I know some beautiful, wonderful A-type personality people that would be terrified to live their lives that way. But, I think for me, it's worked out pretty well. And just by the virtue of trying new things that I may or may not be good at, and being okay. I beat myself up when I'm not successful at things, but then I try to turn that around and say, okay, what have I learned from this? And, what will I do different? And just go from there, you give yourself a little grace. But the great thing is, my mom would always say, everything can be reversed except for death, right? Then she, when I had a kid, she was like, well, you're kind of stuck now, so you can't go back. But then there's a time period where your role expires, at least in the major way of having to be responsible. So that's what I think I would, kind of leave you all. Like, you have these wonderful questions, and these paths that you have in front of you. I think it's just, kind of really take the opportunity. It's kind of like a little bit of self-love, right? To kind of focus on yourself, the things that you like, the things that interest you, being willing to try things that might be a little scary that you're going to grow from. And that is what I think is this beautiful, like, privilege of being in higher ed. That I know not all students have that privilege, but if you can carve out some space to do that, I think you'll hopefully find that you'll be happy. Maybe not all the time, but more times than not.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That was
thank you.
great advice. We appreciate it.
Thank you. This is wonderful. I appreciate the invite. Good luck. And if you all are curious about our SSS programs or graduate school or anything like that, hopefully Jefferson, right? We can be of assistance to you on your educational path, but we have, the regular SSS program for students just in general, or exploring different majors. Good luck. Thank you, Marianne. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I'm not there. I'm just like totally swamped,
No worries, no worries.
but it's nice to see you.
Likewise.
I don't suppose anybody wants to bring me a sandwich.